Before we configure vSAN, we need to configure the vSAN networking. So I've made a couple of changes to my hosts here. We take a look at storage devices. We can see that there's an extra couple of local storage devices attached to my hosts. We've got a 500 gigabyte SAS disk and a 120 gigabyte NVMe or PCIe SSD. So we need to go to virtual switches, add networking, and we want to add a VM kernel network adapter. We're going to create a new switch, and we want to make this a 9000 MTU switch, and we need to add some adapters to it. Now you can see, again, I've added 2 extra adapters to this host. We call this vSAN, and we're going to tick the vSAN service in the list there. MTU from the switch. Excellent. And then set the IP addresses. So use 192.168.30.102. Finish. And what I'll now do is I'll use my host profile to apply this to the other host. So I'm going to say copy settings from host. I'm going to select host 2, and that will now update the host profile with the changes I've made to host 2. I'll return to my hosts and clusters, go to host 3, check compliance. Immediately we see it is not in compliance, so we can now go into details, and again we can't remediate yet because we need to set some customizations, so we will see some additional network adapters in this view, and we need to set the IP addresses on those. 192.168.30.103 255.255.255.0 and remediate. So next we want to configure our witness host in our 2-node cluster. So again, if you've got 3 or more nodes, you don't need a witness, but if you're doing this with 2 nodes, you need a witness host. So you'll see I've added this extra host here. It's much lower spec, it's only 8 gigabytes of RAM, it's got no data stores, or it's got no data disks locally attached beyond where ESX is installed. It's also not inside my cluster. It is in the data center, but it is not part of the cluster, and that's crucial. This witness host cannot be a part of the cluster. So we're now going to configure this witness host ready for it to serve its role as the witness. So we'll go to configuration and into virtual switches and add networking. So very similar to what we did for the other hosts, we need to configure a VM kernel adapter. Give it a 9000 MTU. Assign my second NIC. You'll notice I've only used 1 network adapter for this witness host. That's all that's required. If you have more than 1 network adapter, I would suggest using 2 even on your witness host, but for this demonstration I'm just using 1. You need to enable vSAN on that interface and configure the IP addresses on it. So with our witness host deployed and configured, we can now go and configure vSAN. So we'll select a 2-node vSAN cluster, and it's told us we need to go and turn off HA. So let me go back to my cluster configuration. So HA is compatible with vSAN, but you need to turn HA off temporarily whilst you go through the process of configuring vSAN. So we'll start that again, 2-node vSAN cluster, and it allows us to move on. Just note that wizard will allow you to force on. It will let you carry on if you haven't disabled HA, but then when you get to the end of the wizard, the task will fail to complete. So you do need to cancel out the wizard and go and turn off HA if you haven't already. On this screen, we can set the space efficiency settings, so compression only or deduplication and compression. Of course, compression and deduplication both cause increased processor load on the host and can therefore increase latency for the storage. We also have options for data at rest encryption and data in transit encryption. So data at rest is while it's actually stored on the disks. Data in transit is as it is actually read from the disks and gets transported to the host that is running the VM. How do we keep that encrypted? And also the replication traffic between the nodes. And large scale cluster support. So by default, the vSAN cluster will support 32 nodes. If you want to support up to 64 nodes, you can turn this on. If you don't turn this on now, you will have to reboot all of your hosts to enable it at a later date. So if you're getting close to 32 hosts and you think you might grow beyond that, it's well worth turning that on now. On this screen, we select the disks in the host that we are going to claim to contribute to data stores in our vSAN environment. So we can see it's automatically detected my 2 NVMe disks as cache and my other SSDs, my ordinary SSDs, shall we say, as the capacity tier. And of course, we can change those if we wish. And if it has detected these as flash and they are in fact standard hard drives, which can happen on certain arrays, we can change the type there if necessary. We now select our witness host, and we now need to select the disks that will store the witness components. So I have created 2 8GB SSDs on this host to do just that. At the very end, we click finish, and that will now go off and create our vSAN cluster. We now have our vSAN deployed, so we can see here some of the settings that we already set in the wizard, some additional functions that were not there in the wizard as well. We're going to take a look at data stores now. We can see it's created a vSAN data store for us with the capacity of both of our capacity drives. We have the disk management section here. This is where we can come to take a look at the disk groups that have been configured within each host, and we can add disks and claim unused disks to each pool. So if we add some extra storage to our hosts, we can come in here to do that. Again, vSAN works best when you keep things consistent. So if you add some disks to one of your hosts, you're recommended to add some disks to your other hosts as well to keep them as consistent as possible. Fault domains allows you to define multiple fault domains. So if you have, for example, your hosts are split across 2 blade center chassis and you want to make sure that the failure of a blade center is a recoverable event, then you can do so in here by saying hosts 1, 2, 3, and 4 are in one blade center, and hosts 5, 6, 7, and 8 are in the other blade center. And vSphere will manage the RAID configuration on those disks so as to avoid a situation where the loss of a blade center will bring down the whole cluster. And in here we have the option for data store sharing, which is not actually on the vSphere professional exam, so we'll not go into that in too much detail.